On November 4, 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter broke through a sealed doorway in the Valley of the Kings and became the first person in over 3,000 years to look upon the intact tomb of a minor, largely forgotten boy, king named Tutankhamun. Carter's own sponsor, Lord Carnarvon, arrived weeks later to witness the moment the inner chamber was finally breached, and when he anxiously asked whether Carter could see anything through the small hole they'd made in the sealed door, Carter's now legendary reply was simple: yes, wonderful things. What he found inside would become the single most famous archaeological discovery in human history. Room after room of gold, ivory, and lapis lazuli, over 5,000 individually catalogued objects in total, culminating in a solid gold sarcophagus containing the single object that has since become the most recognizable symbol of ancient Egypt on Earth. The Boy King's funerary death mask, 11 kilograms of solid gold inlaid with blue glass and semi-precious stone. Its calm, otherworldly expression staring out from beneath a striped royal headdress for over 3,000 years before Carter's torchlight ever touched it. The discovery generated its own separate mystery almost immediately, one that had to do with aliens and everything to do with a chain of genuinely strange coincidences. Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy financier of Carter's excavation, died just months after the tomb's opening from an infected mosquito bite that developed into blood poisoning, a death that newspapers at the time seized on as evidence of an ancient curse of the pharaohs, supposedly triggered by disturbing the Boy King's resting place. Several other individuals connected to the expedition died in the years that followed, under circumstances the press found similarly suggestive, feeding a media sensation that ran for years and that modern statisticians have since pointed out reflects fairly ordinary mortality rates for a large group of people over an extended period, rather than any genuine curse. It's a reminder that Tutankhamun's tomb has generated sweeping, dramatic public mythology from the very first week it was opened, long before any ancient astronaut theory ever entered the picture. For decades, the mask itself was assumed to be a single, continuous piece of hammered gold, an already extraordinary feat of ancient metalworking on its own. Then, in 1968, a team conducted the first X-ray imaging ever performed on the mask, and what the scans revealed sent a quiet shock wave through the archaeological world. The mask wasn't one piece at all. It had been assembled from multiple separate gold components: the face, the headdress, the ceremonial beard, joined together using a technique so fine, so precise, that the seams were completely invisible to the naked eye, even under close inspection. Mainstream Egyptologists have generally described the technique as an extraordinarily sophisticated form of ancient soldering, evidence of a level of skill in Bronze Age metallurgy that even specialists hadn't fully appreciated until the X-rays forced them to. But a smaller, more provocative reading of the same evidence has circulated for decades in fringe research circles, and it asks a pointed question: how exactly does a civilization without electricity, without any known high-temperature precision tools beyond simple charcoal forges, produce a joint clean enough that it would take modern X-ray technology to even prove it exists? Some proponents of this theory have gone as far as describing the technique in almost anachronistically modern language, arguing the join looks less like hand soldering and more like something closer to a modern, high-precision fusion weld, the kind of bond you'd expect from equipment that, on paper, wouldn't exist for another 3,000 years. It's worth being direct about where the evidence actually stands before going further, because this is exactly the kind of claim that tends to get flattened in retelling. No archaeologist, metallurgist, or restoration specialist who has physically examined the mask has ever published a peer-reviewed finding describing the joins as laser welds handhelds. In any literal sense, laser technology requires a coherent light source that simply has no plausible ancient origin and no residue, vitrification pattern, or heat-affected zone consistent with laser use has ever been documented on the mask. What mainstream metallurgists and restoration specialists have confirmed is that the joining technique is a form of soldering, likely using a lead or gold-based solder alongside careful, controlled heat application, extraordinarily skilled for its era, but explicable within the boundaries of known ancient technology, not evidence of tools that shouldn't exist. That distinction rarely survives the retelling once the claim reaches social media, where a soldering technique impressively fine enough to fool a 1968 X-ray machine tends to flatten into the far more viral, far less accurate ancient Egyptians used lasers. Whatever the explanation, though, one thing is true and worth sitting with. This level of metallurgical precision on an object built for a minor pharaoh who died in his teens and ruled a fraction as long as history's great kings remains a genuinely remarkable, still not fully reconstructed technical achievement, precise enough that modern goldsmiths attempting to replicate the technique using only Bronze Age tools have struggled to match the result. That gap between remarkable and not fully understood and physically impossible without outside help is exactly the space where the broader ancient astronaut theory has lived for over half a century. The theory's modern popularizer was a Swiss author named Erich von Däniken, whose 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods, became an international bestseller, arguing that an advanced extraterrestrial civilization had visited Earth in antiquity, shared knowledge and technology with primitive human societies, and inspired the religious and mythological traditions of cultures across the ancient world. Egypt chief among them, von Däniken pointed to ancient religious texts describing gods descending from the sky in chariots of fire or divine vehicles, arguing these passages, read literally rather than symbolically, described genuine spacecraft witnessed and later mythologized by early human observers who had no vocabulary to describe what they'd actually seen. Von Däniken's central argument rested on a simple premise that certain ancient achievements were, in his view, too advanced, too precise, or too visually similar to modern technology to have been produced by unaided human ingenuity, and that the only remaining explanation was direct contact with beings from elsewhere. Mainstream archaeologists and historians rejected the theory almost unanimously from the moment it was published, and parts of von Däniken's own personal history, including a prior fraud conviction connected to an earlier hotel business unrelated to his archaeological claims, have been cited by critics as reason for skepticism about his broader credibility. None of that stopped Chariots of the Gods from selling tens of millions of copies worldwide, or from spawning an entire genre of imitators, and eventually a modern History Channel series, Ancient Aliens, that has now run for over 20 seasons, built on substantially the same premise. Von Däniken's theory found an even more elaborate companion a few years later in the work of Zecharia Sitchin, whose 1976 book, The 12th Planet, proposed that ancient Sumerian texts, rather than Egyptian ones, held the clearest record of extraterrestrial contact, describing a race of beings called the Anunnaki, who supposedly traveled from a hidden planet in Earth's own solar system and genetically engineered early humans to serve as a labor force. Sitchin's translations of the underlying Sumerian cuneiform texts have been rejected almost unanimously by professional Assyriologists and linguists specializing in ancient Mesopotamian languages, who argue his readings systematically misinterpret established vocabulary and grammar to manufacture references to space travel and genetic engineering that the original texts simply don't contain. Even so, Sitchin's Anunnaki mythology has become deeply intertwined with the broader ancient astronaut theory in popular culture, often cited alongside Egyptian evidence as part of one single, unified narrative of prehistoric extraterrestrial contact spanning multiple ancient civilizations simultaneously. Egypt became one of the theory's favorite hunting grounds almost immediately, and nowhere more than at the Temple of Seti I in Abydos, roughly 300 miles south of Cairo. Carved into the temple's ceiling is a set of hieroglyphic panels that, from a certain angle and with a modern eye, bear an unmistakable resemblance to a helicopter, alongside shapes some viewers have interpreted as a submarine and other modern vehicles. Photographs of the so-called helicopter hieroglyphs have circulated for decades as some of the ancient astronaut theory's single most viral pieces of evidence, a 3,000-year-old carving that appears at a glance to depict technology that wouldn't be invented until the 20th century. Egyptologists who've studied the actual carving offer a considerably less dramatic and considerably better documented explanation. The panel is what's known as a palimpsest, meaning the original hieroglyphic inscription was later plastered over and recarved with new text by a subsequent pharaoh, a common practice in ancient Egyptian temple renovation. Over the centuries, the plaster covering the earlier inscription eroded unevenly, allowing fragments of the older and newer carvings to show through simultaneously in a way that happens by pure visual coincidence to overlap into shapes resembling modern vehicles. It's a real, physically verifiable process, not a cover story invented after the fact, but a well-documented feature of Egyptian temple construction found at other palimpsest sites with no accompanying helicopter controversy at all. A similar pattern plays out at the Temple of Hathor in Dendera, home to a relief carving ancient astronaut theorists have nicknamed the Dendera Light, a stylized image some interpreters have argued resembles a giant Bronze Age light bulb, complete with what looks like a filament and a base cable connected to a device some have speculated functioned as an ancient power source. Mainstream Egyptological interpretation, grounded in the accompanying hieroglyphic text carved directly above the image, reads the relief instead as a scene from Egyptian creation mythology, a lotus flower giving rise to a serpent, a common and well-documented motif elsewhere in Egyptian religious art, with no accompanying textual reference to light, illumination, or any device resembling a lamp. One specific scholarly reading has even proposed the imagery relates to a ritual involving evaporative cooling and fine mist tied to a snake venom motif elsewhere in the relief, a considerably more mundane but textually supported explanation than an ancient electrical generator. Then there's the Saqqara bird, a small 3-inch wooden artifact recovered from an Egyptian tomb, carved with wings and a shape that some researchers have argued shows unusually sophisticated, aerodynamically informed design for its era, prompting speculation that it may represent an ancient glider or aircraft model, evidence that Egypt's pharaohs possessed some rudimentary understanding of powered or unpowered flight passed down from more advanced visitors. Aviation engineers and Egyptologists who've studied the object in detail have generally concluded that its wing proportions don't actually match functional glider aerodynamics, that no tail rudder or means of stable flight control is present in the original artifact, and that its most likely purpose was decorative or ceremonial, a stylized bird figure consistent with other avian imagery common throughout Egyptian religious art and burial customs. A replica built with a fin added by modern researchers has been shown to glide under specific conditions, a modification skeptics point out wasn't present on the original object, meaning the evidence of ancient flight capability required a design change made 3,000 years after the fact to actually demonstrate it. The pyramids themselves haven't escaped the theory either. Beyond von Däniken's own core claim that the pharaohs received direct construction assistance from extraterrestrial visitors, later researchers, including Robert Bauval, have proposed what's become known as the Orion correlation theory. The idea that the three main pyramids at Giza were deliberately positioned to mirror the exact arrangement of the three stars in Orion's belt, encoding a kind of celestial blueprint into the Giza plateau itself. Mainstream Egyptologists and astronomers have pushed back on the specific alignment claims, arguing the correlation requires selectively adjusting scale, orientation, and which specific stars are compared to make the pattern fit convincingly, and pointing to the extensive archaeological record, inscribed workers' villages, quarry marks, ramps, and internal construction graffiti naming actual work crews that documents the pyramids as a genuine, if staggeringly ambitious, human engineering project carried out over decades by tens of thousands of skilled laborers, not an instantaneous act of otherworldly construction. What keeps this entire body of theory alive, more than any single artifact, is the genuine, well-documented friction between independent researchers and Egypt's own antiquities authorities. Friction that gives the government cover-up framing more real texture than most conspiracy theories ever manage to earn. Access to Egypt's most significant archaeological sites has historically been tightly controlled, requiring government permits, official excavation licenses, and close supervision by the Ministry of Antiquities, a bureaucratic reality that exists primarily to prevent looting, unauthorized excavation, and damage to irreplaceable sites, but one that has also, in practice, made it genuinely difficult for independent or fringe researchers to gain the kind of direct, extended physical access to artifacts like Tutankhamun's mask that would be needed to run new tests or settle lingering technical questions once and for all. Requests for updated, comprehensive scanning of the mask beyond the original 1968 imaging and for public release of full raw data from more recent scans have moved slowly through official channels for years, feeding the sense among some researchers that the full picture is being deliberately withheld rather than simply managed through ordinary institutional caution. That tension boiled over in spectacular, entirely real fashion in 2014 when museum staff at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo accidentally knocked the mask's ceremonial beard loose while cleaning its display case and, in a widely reported scandal, hastily reattached it using ordinary epoxy glue, a completely inappropriate adhesive for a 3,000-year-old artifact that left visible smears and scratches across one of the most famous objects on Earth. The repair wasn't publicly disclosed for over a year, only surfacing after museum staff leaked the story to the press, at which point Egyptian officials initially downplayed the damage before eventually admitting fault, launching an investigation, and referring 8 museum employees to a disciplinary court for gross negligence. A German-Egyptian conservation team ultimately spent months carefully removing the epoxy and reattaching the beard using beeswax, the same material ancient Egyptian craftsmen would have used, restoring the mask to public display in December 2015. The episode is real, well documented, and deeply embarrassing for Egypt's antiquities establishment on its own terms. A live demonstration that the people entrusted with the mask's care had, at least once, badly mishandled it and then tried to quietly cover their tracks. Whether that same institutional instinct toward damage control and restricted access extends to something as extraordinary as suppressing evidence of extraterrestrial contact, or whether it simply reflects the ordinary, all-too-human mix of bureaucracy, embarrassment, and self-protection you'd expect from any institution managing a national treasure under constant global scrutiny is exactly the kind of question that separates a genuine, evidence-based cover-up from an understandable, if unflattering, human error dressed up as one. Believers in a deeper truth point to a broader pattern beyond the mask alone. The persistent difficulty outside researchers have faced getting access to conduct independent testing on other major Egyptian sites, the Egyptian government's historically tight control over publication and excavation rights, and a handful of high-profile incidents in which foreign researchers' access was abruptly revoked or restricted after publishing findings unwelcome to official narratives. Skeptics counter that virtually every one of these access disputes has a documented, mundane, bureaucratic, or political explanation. Funding disputes, diplomatic tensions, disagreements over publication credit, or simple overreach by international teams, and that the government won't let independent researchers do whatever they want with irreplaceable, one-of-a-kind national treasures is a far less extraordinary explanation than it's often made out to be, even if it does leave certain questions frustratingly unresolved for the public watching from outside. No single figure looms larger in the gatekeeper version of this conspiracy theory than Zahi Hawass, Egypt's former minister of antiquities, and, for decades, the single most powerful and internationally recognizable authority controlling access to Egypt's ancient sites. Hawass built a media career as the charismatic face of Egyptology on Western television, but fringe researchers have long portrayed him as something closer to an active suppressor of inconvenient evidence, pointing to his outspoken, sometimes combative public dismissals of ancient astronaut claims, his tight personal control over which foreign teams received excavation permits during his tenure, and several publicized disputes with independent researchers whose access was revoked or restricted after clashes over methodology or public statements. Hawass and mainstream Egyptologists have consistently maintained that this gatekeeping reflects ordinary, necessary preservation standards for irreplaceable sites that have suffered real looting and real amateur damage in the past, including, ironically, the mask's own 2014 epoxy scandal, which happened under exactly the kind of institutional oversight critics claim is protecting the truth rather than the artifacts. Whether Hawass functioned as a legitimate steward of fragile antiquities or as a specific, individually identifiable obstacle to independent verification of the ancient astronaut theory depends almost entirely on which side of the debate you're already inclined to believe walking in, which is, in its own way, exactly the kind of ambiguity that keeps a conspiracy theory alive for 50 years without ever fully resolving. There have been real, serious scientific efforts to look deeper into Egypt's monuments using genuinely cutting-edge, non-invasive tools, and their existence cuts both ways in this debate. The multinational Scan Pyramids project launched in 2015 using muon tomography, a technique that measures naturally occurring cosmic ray particles passing through solid stone, detecting subtle differences in particle absorption that reveal hidden empty spaces the same way an X-ray reveals a bone inside soft tissue, identified a previously unknown, massive hidden chamber, at least 30 meters long, deep within the Great Pyramid of Giza in 2017. The finding was independently confirmed using 3 separate detection methods and published in the peer-reviewed journal Nature, making it one of the rare instances in this entire field where a genuinely startling new discovery about a major Egyptian monument met the full standard of independent, transparent, scientific verification rather than arriving through a single researcher's unpublished claim. Follow-up work by the same project team continues to this day, using increasingly refined muon detectors to map the pyramid's interior in ever greater resolution solution, with researchers stating the void's exact purpose, whether structural, ceremonial, or something else entirely, remains genuinely undetermined even now. To ancient astronaut proponents, discoveries like this are proof that Egypt's most iconic structures still hold real, undiscovered secrets after more than 4,000 years, and that the full extent of what's hidden inside them has never actually been fully mapped, let alone explained. To mainstream Egyptologists, the same discovery is proof of exactly the opposite. Legitimate science, using real physics and full transparency with the international research community, is actively finding new answers inside these monuments all the time. And every one of those answers so far has pointed toward sophisticated, resourceful, unmistakably human engineering, not a hidden alien chamber waiting to be uncovered. So, where does that leave a boy king's golden face, sealed for over 3,000 years, and still not fully explained by the people who've spent a century studying it? Every individual thread of this theory, examined in isolation, tends to fall apart under close scrutiny. The helicopter hieroglyphs are a palimpsest. The Dendera light is a creation myth. The Saqqara bird needed a fin added 100 years later to actually glide. But taken together, as a pattern rather than a checklist, they form something that has proven remarkably durable across more than 5 decades of debunking. Not a single smoking gun artifact, but a persistent, low-grade sense that ancient Egypt achieved things we still can't fully explain, guarded by institutions that have, at least once, been caught mishandling the evidence and covering their own tracks while doing it. Was Tutankhamun's mask built using nothing more than the extraordinary, hard-won skill of Bronze Age Egyptian goldsmiths, a genuine human achievement so advanced it briefly looked, under 1968 X-ray technology, like it belonged to a more advanced era entirely? Or is it exactly what the fringe theory says it is? One small, gleaming piece of physical evidence that ancient Egypt's rulers had help from somewhere far beyond the Nile, sitting behind reinforced glass in Cairo, still waiting for someone with enough access and enough courage to run the test that finally proves it.